Hey everybody, this is Zoltan, and today we're going to go over customizing leagues. I'm going to be focusing here on IBAR. This is ABAR, or however you want to say it. This is a team in the La Liga Primera division, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix 10 teams, the bottom 10 teams from the La Liga Primera and the top 10 teams from Segunda. That way I have more of an even 20 teams in the top division. Also, what we're going to do is show how to put your team, whatever team you choose, in the career mode, either in the Europa League or in the Champions League. Here's an example of how to do that. I'm going to be moving IBAR, and we press swap teams. You have another option up here. I'm going to move them down to second division in place of Cadiz, however you say this. And now Cadiz is in the Primera division. And so what I can do from here is go over to the team that I want to switch into, and that would be Valencia, because they're in the Champions League. I can swap the team that I just took out, which is right here. It's ABAR. And so now ABAR is back in the Primera division, but now they're in Valencia's spot. So when I decide to start this career mode, they'll be in the Champions League, and unfortunately for Valencia, they are now in the second division. So what I'm also going to do is, as I mentioned, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to swap out the top 10 teams from the second division and put them into the Primera division. And so we'll just begin here with, we've already done Cadiz, and now we can go through some of these. This is one of them. I've already written them down. So I can swap this team with Real Sociedad. And Huesca with Atletico Madrid. And Lugo, I'm going to leave. Miranda, leave them. These teams are all in the lower 10. Girona, I can swap them with Barcelona. Malaga, they're in the top 10, so I switch them with Real Betis. Real Sociedad, I already moved down. Okay, this one I can switch with Sevilla. Las Palmas, switch them with Getafe. Oviedo with Bilbao. Should have two more. So they change the alphabetical order every time you add another team, so it's not easy to find it. So I'm going to swap with Real Madrid. And I think I have one more to go. So they're hiding over here. Here they are at the end. and swap them with Villarreal. Alright, so if I go back and look at this is my new league, and again I have, what's really good about this is we have the transfer budget is low, so there won't be a lot of change, but also if you look at the stars, this team has 3.5 stars. Every team now in the Primera Division has either 3.5 or 4 stars, and their transfer budgets are under 14 million, so they're all pretty similar teams. And so again, this is the bottom 10 of the Primera Division and the top 10 of the Segunda Division. And the other good thing about this is most of these teams have their own stadium. As I go through, you can see the ground lists the stadium. So one after another, even these really small teams, some of them don't. And I gave them some of the really cool, more Mediterranean-looking stadiums. But if you look at like Huesca as a really, they've been in the Primera Division before, and their transfer budget is so small, $2.3 million transfer budget. But they do have a really cool, small stadium. So you have a lot of teams here. Las Palmas, which is a really cool, in the Canary Islands, has a really cool stadium. So I moved them back into the first division. Here's another one. They bounce. A lot of these teams are yo-yo teams. They kind of bounce back and forth every year. So many of them, Girona, for example, was in last year, but not this year. But they have a really cool small stadium. So it creates a little variety. And so now you might want to think, what am I going to do with the second division? Because a lot of these teams are obviously going to be promoted, and eventually it'll all end up in a few years back the way it was. So the way to solve this problem is we're going to swap out the teams that I just brought in and bring in even worse teams. And the way that we're going to do this is swapping them out to teams from France, and not the Premier Division, or League One, but actually League Two. And so Real Betis, for example, I will bring in for Valencian. There's no way I can even pronounce this team here. And so the nice thing, they're only 2 stars, so there's no chance this team is ever going to be promoted. And so we can just go through each one, and they'll end up at the bottom of this Spanish second division for quite a while. I don't think that any of these teams will ever make it. So they're just basically a placeholder, and getting rid of all these teams that would eventually obviously get promoted back up into the Primera Division. So I don't want that. I want to take them all out and switch them out with teams in the next country. So in terms, if you're thinking about travel distance from their home stadium, they're still going to be able to play in a reasonable way because France is not that far away. So I'm just swapping out the teams that I just brought in. Trying to keep track of everything. Real Sociedad. Not too much left, but they re-alphabetize every time, so it's kind of a pain. So it's good to have these all written down, that way you know which ones you've done. Alright, I'm supposed to be switching these with Claremont Foot. No, I already did Claremont Foot, so that's not right. So this is supposed to be Ajaxo, this team here. There we go. I think that might be everybody, except I don't know if I did Getafe. I think I got everybody. Alright, so I got all those big teams out of there. So no chance of them sneaking back into the Primera Division. So I could obviously just leave things like this. But now if you look at France, this is going to be a little bit of a weird League 2, has a lot of big teams in it. So what I've decided to do is go through here and switch these with teams where they might actually have a chance of getting in the Europa or Champions League. So I've decided to switch out, for example, the two Madrid teams. I want to move them up into League 1. And so I'm going to move them up here to Nimes, which is a yo-yo team, so they can move back down into the League 2. And let's try to find Real Madrid. So at least we keep that rivalry going, I guess. And Dijon is here, Dijon. They're another yo-yo team. Barcelona, I've decided to move them to Italy. And let's see how long it takes for them to get back into the Champions League. So switch them out for a lower level. The team is now in France, which seems silly, but I mean it's not that far away. Alright, so let's see who else. We got Betis. I am going to actually move them for a rest of the world team. Actually, no, what I want to do first is I want to get a team and put them in Portugal. So let's move Valencia, which is also not too far away from Spain and Portugal. And they will have a chance to get into a Europa spot or maybe even Champions League. So here's a pretty low-level Portuguese team is now in France. Alright, so let's move some of these other guys. Bilbao, I'm going to leave here and see if they can work their way up into Division 1. Getafe, I can move them out and see if I ever see them again by moving them and switching them with Kiev. Because frequently that team gets chosen as a team in the either Champions League or Europa. And so they'll have that spot and easier to see them again. Betis, I can put them with Greece. Olympiacos. So they'll be in the Champions League. And let's try another one. Sociedad, we're leaving them there. Sevilla, we can move them with Dynamo Zagreb. And let's do one more. Villarreal. And we'll switch them with Lokomotiv. Now the reason I'm doing this is because you know, I want to be able to actually play these teams again at some point. So I'll put them in slots where they will end up in Europa or Champions League. Make it more interesting and get back to my Primera Division, La Liga. And again, if you look at this really nice mix of teams that are all 4, 5, 6 million transfer budget, sometimes 9 or 11 million. And so it'll keep the level of competition pretty even. Everybody right now is a 3.5 to 4-star team. And it'll be kind of fun to play because each of these smaller grounds are actually a really cool looking stadiums with some variety. So those are all the teams, and I think probably Celta is probably the highest level. And then there's also Espanyol, which actually has a Europa spot. Now some of these other teams swapped in, so they will also have Champions and Europa spots too. So I'm going to choose Eibar. And they have a 6 million transfer budget, but I have a percentage increase, so I think it goes up to maybe 9 or 10 million. And so let's see. I'm going to use these settings. Another thing I also did was with all 20 of these teams, I've decided to add in the roster an old retiring veteran. So somebody who's 35 years or older. Each team got one player just to kind of spice things up a little bit. So we've got guys like Iniesta, Quaresma, Carlos Tevez, you know, some of these old guys coming back, Frank Ribery, and let's save this. So, you know, it just adds one extra player to each team just to make it fun. All right, so let's go take a look at my objectives. So I am in a Champions League spot. They expect me to win the league for some reason, which is surprising, and win the cup. So just go through this real quick. All right, so what am I going to do with my team? Right now I have a 9.72 million transfer budget. Let's make this an 80-20 ratio is what I usually have, something like that. And so I basically have a 15.5 transfer budget with 75,000 wage budget. And I have, this is my team. I've already set it up with a 4-3-3 attack, which is the way I usually play, with an aggressive build-up. And I also play with my fullbacks who sit back deeper. And so I'm thinking I need some kind of a talisman. A lot of these older players I'm probably going to end up selling. And so if you ask my top player, Dimitrovic, the goalkeeper, who he would like, and of course he suggested his friend Dusan Tadic, who is from the same country. So let's go see how much he costs. Also happens to be one of my favorite players to play with because he has the chant. So I'm going to put him on my short list. He's an 84 overall. And it says I might have to offer over 45,000, so, or 45 million, which is a lot. So it's probably going to be even more than that. So we'll see. So I need to do something because I clearly don't have that much to offer right now. I'm going to have to sell some players as well as get some money from this preseason tournament that I'm currently in, which is right here, some kind of European International Cup. So I'm going to have to get some money by hopefully trying to win that tournament. But let's take a look here at Champions League. So this shows that I am actually there, even though Eibar is not supposed to be there. I took Valencia's spot. So there are other teams that we can see here. Girona, they took somebody's spot there. And Huesca, they took somebody's. We got Villarreal, who was actually supposed to be Lokomotiv Moscow. So that did work. So that'll be interesting that they're in Group D now. And Sevilla, they took Dynamo Zagreb's spot. So yeah, that did work to get some of those. Real Betis, they have Olympiacos spot as well. So we can go through and look at the Europa League, and I'm sure there's probably some teams that here's the one, UD Almeria. I don't know who they were before, but they now have Sevilla's spot, I guess. So that's how you can control what you want in Champions League and Europa League. Now let's take a quick look here at what I'm planning to do with this Eibar team. As you can see, I do have my one older player here. Quaresma is 35 years old. I do have another retiring player as well. Charles is 35. So one of them is going to retire for sure, but it might be this guy. So as I mentioned, I brought in one old player to add to each team just to have some noticeable legendary guys, people like David Villa, Gigi Buffon, Iniesta, Carlos Tevez. So there's a few other guys, Ribery, that I put one on each team. So it'll make it kind of fun. So on here I've got quite a few older players. Some of them are in their last year of their contract, like this guy. So I'm going to have to go through and try to sell or either re-sign some of them. Try to raise some money. There's Quaresma. Pedro Leon might be a candidate for sale. Some of these guys are older, 33, 32. Obviously, I'm not going to sell the player that I just added. And this guy, I think, is probably retiring. I do have a couple players on loan, but what I'm going to need to do is... Yeah, here's retiring player. So I'm only going to get to use him for 1 year. But, you know, I thought it would be fun to have some players that make it a little different. Ibrahimovic, for example. And then the regions are going to be interesting in this division. So what I'm going to have to do at this point is try to put up some players for sale on the transfer market and see if I can raise enough money over the next few weeks to see if I have enough to go and make an offer on my new talisman, Dusan Tadic. And I might even have enough left over to get some young players that I can try to grow. But, you know, I think it's going to be a fun season because you can control who's in your division. I've got a lot of cool teams that are lower level, but I'm a relatively lower level as well. So I am in the Champions League, so I am playing Chelsea. But what's going to happen over a couple of years as these teams win the Primera Division, they're going to get some pretty big prize money. So little by little, they're going to start bringing in more players into this league. So that's going to be interesting. But every team that I'm playing has kind of a cool small stadium. It should make it kind of fun. Not every team. There's maybe 30% of the teams, but I've added, you know, I gave them a cool generic stadium, so those should be fun. So there you have it. That's the first edition, and I will have another episode of this as I start selling some players, and then eventually hopefully I have enough to bring in a good central attacking midfielder is what I want, so that's why I went after Dusan Tadic. So let's see what happens and look for episode 2 coming up next.